Okay, and then go ahead and take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Belinda, for the opportunity to come talk to what I consider to be the SDSU in the Southwest. I actually graduated from the SDSU in the Midwest, so South Dakota State University is where I'm from. So every time I see SDSU in something when I'm talking with Belinda, of course, I think of my own school as well. I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about engineering within a healthcare organization. When we think about healthcare right now, healthcare is really about caring for the patient, and that's a fundamental component of it. But technology is also a big part of it. And some of the things that we've done really well in the past historically aren't going to allow us to continue to be successful into the future unless we really embrace some of the changes that technology is providing for us. And the way I'd like to look at this is, as Mayo Clinic as an organization, we're very successful, but if we don't embrace the change, then somebody else is gonna do it for us. And you always want to be in a position of being the company that disrupts your own market, your own business model, because otherwise, you won't be able to sustain your business. And one of the things that I think over the last few months, there've been a lot of challenges to the healthcare system because of the number of people that are getting sick from, COVID-19. But one of the good things that has come out of it is the ability to have sessions like this, where we're able to more readily communicate with people around the country and around the world. I was having a conversation this morning with a person working in this area in Jordan, in the Middle East this morning, and those things just didn't happen 6 months ago. So I think that there are some great things that technology can enable us to do that maybe historically we haven't really done. I'm going to introduce myself quickly just to give you a sense of my background. So my name's Mark Whede. I've got a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering, master's degree in biomedical engineering, and an MBA. I started at Mayo right out of graduate school. It's the only place that I've ever worked. And I spent the first part of my career developing medical devices, with focus on sensors, electrodes, analog circuit design, and microprocessor design as well. Also done a lot of programming, embedded systems, PCs, and mini computers. But really for the last 20 years, I've been in various management roles, and I managed to move around the group quite a bit. I managed our electronics groups and our software developments groups. I've managed our mechanical unit and our machine shop. I also started our first project management office almost 20 years ago. And I think that was one of the first ones at Mayo Clinic. And more recently, I've taken over as chair of the Division of Engineering. You may not be familiar with the history of Mayo. Mayo is year in and year out ranked as the #1 hospital and healthcare provider in the world. It was founded in 1889. There was a partnership between the Mayo brothers, our founders, Will and Charlie Mayo, and the Sisters of St. Francis that were led by, at that point, Mother Mary Alfred Mose. And the Mayos ran the clinical practice half of the building, but the nuns ran the hospital for almost 100 years before the two organizations merged back in 1984. So this small group practice that they started back in 1889 has become the first, the largest, and arguably the best integrated not-for-profit medical group practice in the world. And the Mayo brothers and their colleagues have had a lot of inventions over the year, but some argue that this group practice model of medicine is their greatest invention. So a lot of people ask, how did this come to be? In 1889, when the Mayo Clinic was formed, it was a small town in a cornfield in Minnesota, a little town of 5,000 people. And the question we're always asked is, how did this come to be a worldwide destination medical center? Because to be perfectly honest, we're still a small city in a cornfield. Mayo, right now in Rochester is only a city of 100,000 people. So we're still relatively small community. And I like to think this is where it began. This is a photo of Dr. William Worrell Mayo, who is the father of the, oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't screen sharing. Glad you pointed that out. 1 second here. Just a sec. There we go. Okay, that should be better, right? Okay, thank you. So this is really where it began. This is a photo of Dr. William Worrell Mayo. He's the father of the Mayo brothers as he made his rounds via buggy. This was kind of state of the art when he started his practice back in 1863. Everything he needed, he carried with him on his rounds. Instruments at the time were really simplistic that would allow him to listen to heart songs, lung sounds, test reflexes, maybe blood pressure. But they were on the verge of a transformation in medicine that was led by two seminal events. So the first was the development of anesthesia. So even into the 1800s, surgeons were measured by how fast they could amputate a limb. So one of the leading surgeons of the late 1800s was known for his ability to remove a limb in 30 seconds. And he was so fast, one time he not only amputated the limb, he amputated his assistant's finger. And unfortunately, both of them later died of infection. And that led to the second big innovation in the 1800s, and that was the development of aseptic surgery. So as nice as it was for the patient to be knocked out by anesthesia, most of the patients still died from infection. So surgeons still could only operate as a last resort. In the mid 1800s, if you suffered a traumatic injury like a broken limb from an accident, the mortality rate was 50 or 60%, and that was primarily due to infection. But in 1865, Sir Joseph Lister applied a disinfectant carbolic acid solution to the wound of a 7-year-old boy, and 6 weeks later, the boy walked out of the hospital. And that was really the start of aseptic surgery. So Dr. William Mayo, the elder brother, once remarked that they were born in the right place at the right time to the right family. So the Mayo brothers were really raised in medicine in the same way that a farm kid is raised farming. From their youngest days, they were going with their father on his rounds. They learned by observing and even practicing medicine as children. And of course, when they started their practice in 1889, aseptic surgery was already being practiced in the US, so they quickly adapted that. And at that point, gowns and gloves were starting to be a common sight, as was the cleaning of surfaces, including hands and tools. The dressings on wounds were now changed once a day instead of once a stay, and they now washed hands before surgery, not just after. And early surgical tools were crude. These looked like they came from a hardware store, which probably most of them did, or was often the case the surgeons had to make their own tools. So my group grew out of that rapid proliferation of surgical tools that was occurring after the development of anesthesia and aseptic surgery. So after they first were, early on, they would create their own instruments, but they later recognized they really needed a dedicated group of machinists and technicians because the tools were becoming much more complex. So the first instrument shop was formed at Mayo in 1915. That was 105 years ago. And here you see a photo from an article talking about the manufacturing of bone screws using beef bone and a lathe in our machine shop. So these bone screws were used in the repair of femur fractures, and similar devices were also used for spine stabilization. In 1948, the instrument shop was reformed as a division of engineering. So this is when engineering was brought in to supplement the machining operations. One of the first projects that we worked on was work on what would become the Mayo Gibbon heart-lung machine. So this was the first commercial heart-lung bypass machine and was first used in 1955. According to the Smithsonian, the invention of the heart-lung machine is one of the most significant contributions in the history of cardiac surgery. Many aren't aware of this, but the G-suit was developed at Mayo also as part of a secret World War II effort led by Mayo physician Dr. Earl Whede. Also, early patient monitoring was developed by my team prior to the establishment of modern day commercial patient monitoring equipment. So if you think about it, if we're going back 105 years, the transistor wasn't even invented until the 1940s. The integrated circuit in the 1950s. Mini computers didn't show up till the 1960s, and the first commercial microprocessor wasn't available until the 1970s. And these were the innovations that allowed us to start creating the medical instrumentation that we're familiar with today. And also in the late 70s and early 80s, we assisted with the development and research on the first high-speed scanner, and that was installed at Mayo in about 1975. So let's move to present day. So the mission of our group is to build unique medical devices to enhance patient care and advance medical research. So we haven't been asked to save Mayo Clinic money by making things less expensively, and we haven't been asked to make things that someone else already makes. We've been asked to help create new devices to better serve our patients. So examples of some of our projects include early telemedicine systems. We do a lot of computational modeling of physiology. We create transformational surgical instruments. This is a device that allows repair of a mitral valve in the heart without bypass surgery. So allows us to repair the mitral valve while the heart is still beating. We've done a lot of work in 3D printing. These are some clips we added to a commercial dialysis machine in response to a adverse patient event. We've worked on a bioartificial liver, which has sustained life in animal trials now for up to 72 hours. And we are also working on a variety of neurological devices. So let's talk about a little bit about some of the work we're doing in neurology and neurosurgery. So a major effort over the last 10 years has been work that the engineering team is doing with the neural engineering lab to create a closed loop deep brain stimulation system. So deep brain stimulation is an established treatment for a lot of mostly tremor related disorders. But the goal of this program is to create a closed loop system to treat other disorders like depression or obsessive compulsive disorder, where you don't have objective measures of the effectiveness of treatment. If you've got a tremor disorder, for example, you can tell that it's working because, it's pretty easy to tell when a person has tremor and when it goes away. So if you've got the electrode in the right place in the brain and you turn it on and the tremor goes away, it's working. But if you're using it to treat something like depression or obsessive compulsive disorder, it's a lot harder to tell. So the work that we're doing is to develop a closed loop system, and we're doing that through the development of neurochemical sensing electrodes that are going to help us measure what the impact of the stimulation is. So there's a couple of components of that. One part of it is the electronics and the hardware. So part of that is the creation of the device that is used to measure the neurotransmitters that are released. And we're now working on the third generation of that, which is hardware in support of Institutional Review Board approved studies on humans. We're also going to be using it to develop some closed loop feedback algorithms to test new versions of our neural sensing electrodes. So let's talk about those for a minute. So we are making diamond electrodes. They're conductive diamond electrodes in a diamond reactor that was created in our engineering group. And so this is a hot filament chemical vapor deposition reactor that we created. It uses methane, hydrogen, and trimethyl borane to create these conductive boron doped diamond electrodes. Hold on, there we go. So if we zoom in, so this is a diamond, but this is not our diamond. Our diamonds are on the tip of this electrode. And so if you looked at the magnified view, this is an insulating layer of parylene, and we use a femtosecond laser to expose the tip of it. So this is the diamond tip or the conductive tip of that particular electrode. So here you can get a sense of how let's see if we can get the video running, give you a sense of how it will work. So the electrode is in the rat's brain here, and we're measuring dopamine. We introduce another rat into the cage, and we see the dopamine levels start to go down. That's the fight or flight reflex. Now the rat is going to realize in a moment this is a female rat. And so you see the spike of dopamine that occurs at that point. So we have pretty good signal to noise ratio and pretty good fidelity in these sensing electrodes that we're developing. Another area that we're working on in neurology is trying to eliminate the need for a craniotomy when identifying the focal point of seizures. So a craniotomy would be when they would take half of a patient's skull off, put an electrode array on the surface of their brain, wrap them up, send them to the hospital, and we would wait until they have a seizure. And then we would use the data from that to locate the focal point of that seizure so they could go in and surgically ablate it or something like that. So we've got a couple efforts underway, including the development first of thin film polyamide-based electrodes. So these are the electrodes we want to put between the brain and the skull. And we've got specialized equipment in-house which allows us to fabricate these. But we're also working on the deployment system because we want to replace that craniotomy with a surgery through a small burr hole. So the idea is to put the electrodes in through that hole between the brain and the skull and expand them underneath instead of having to remove so much of the brain. So what you see in the bottom image is a 3D printed prototype that we're testing on cadavers, and we now have a second generation design of this made of titanium, and we're looking to use that to move into some animal trials. Now here's the thin film electrodes that we're making. So these are made in our lab. It's a combination of macro and microgrid arrays, so we can selectively cover both large and small areas of the brain. And we can zoom in a little bit. You can get some finer detail on those electrodes. And then so while we were working on this device to put electrodes between the dura and the brain, we also had this idea that we could modify the device to help use it to drain subdural hematomas. I'm going to see if this video worked. I had trouble with it earlier, but we'll see if I can get it to play right now. So that was the same problem I had below. So I'm sorry about that. I've tried this a couple times. I can get it to play when I'm not presenting over Zoom, but I can't get it when I'm when I've got it up on Zoom. So I'll have to work that out so it works next time I want to share that slide. I want to move on to another device that we're working on too, which is probably more interest to electrical engineers and software developers. So another thing that we're working on is what we're calling a fully functional implantable reference platform. So this is a configurable implantable device. A lot of application nowadays for wearable devices and implantable devices that can record data from various places, that can transmit it wirelessly so that we can get it back to your watch, back to the cloud, somewhere that we can actually do something with that data. And the consumer wearable market is big, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. The medical wearable market is much smaller, but it's also starting to take off. So we have a small circuit board block diagram over here that contains really all of the electronics we need for either wearable or implantable devices, including, RF transmitters for sending data back and forth, even from within the body, FPGA and microcontrollers for running a variety of algorithms, analog front end for interfacing to sensors, and battery power charging circuitry and things like that. Here you can see a picture of one of the prototype circuit boards that we've developed at this point. We also do a lot of work in additive manufacturing. And actually we do additive and subtractive manufacturing. So 3D printing and traditional kinds of machining. And my introduction to 3D printing goes back to 2006 when Mayo was doing surgery on a set of conjoined twins. Abigail and Isabel Carlson were separated by a team of male physicians when they were 6 months old. Surgery on conjoined twins takes months to prepare. And in this particular surgery, there were 17 surgeons and over 60 staff participating in what turned out to be a 12-hour surgery. And on the left-hand side, you see Dr. Moyer, the lead surgeon, and he asked us if we could provide 3D printed models of some of the organs. So the girls were joined at the chest. Isabella's heart was in Abby's chest, and their other organs were twisted together. And he was looking for models that would allow him to visualize internal structures of those organs. So in the image that hopefully is rotating for you, you can see the liver with the bile duct and blood vessels. And then we were able to print a translucent model so that he could share that with his team as they were planning for the operation. And of course, here are Abby and Belle today. They're happy and well-adjusted teenagers. They come back for visits to Mayo every year. So, we get a chance to meet with them when they come back. So after the twins, we started making a whole host of different anatomical models for a variety of complex surgeries. And these are used by surgeons to plan, practice, and guide their surgeries. And we're one of the first institutions in the country to do this. I think we were number 3. Walter Reed and the VA were doing it first, and we were the third group to start doing this. In about 2013, we then created a dedicated anatomical modeling group that's part of radiology now. And of course, they have the ability to do models that are much nicer than, kind of the functional engineering type models that my group does. So, this is really, really advanced in the years since we started this back in the mid 2000s. Now, I want to show you how we can use 3D printing now to help with complex surgeries too. So we start with MRI images. So in this particular case, this patient had a tumor in the lower mandible, and this bone was going to have to be removed and replaced with something. So we created a 3D model of the patient. And here you can see the mandible separated from the rest. And our surgeons will sit down with the engineers and they'll identify what are called the cutting planes. So this is where the bone is going to be cut so that they can remove the tumor, and they can look at it from the side just to make sure that they are able to get all of the tumor. So on the computer, we're able to remove it. And then our engineers design what are called cutting guides. So this is a guide that will attach to the mandible, and it shows the surgeons exactly where to cut to make those same cuts that were created in the model. So this device would be 3D printed then and used by the surgeon to cut out the portion of bone that has a tumor. Now, this is what the replacement jaw looks like when we're done. So we've also got to be able to create these replacement pieces as well. And so at Mayo, we do what's called a fibula free flap. So we actually take your fibula, because it turns out most people can get around pretty well without their fibula. So we take their fibula and we cut the replacement pieces for the jaw. And you can see here where we want to cut them out. Now, historically, the surgeons would do this in the surgical suite, and they would do it by eye. They wouldn't really have any guides to help them. But, now using our anatomical modeling capabilities, we're able to create, again, cutting guides that we use for the femur to cut out the pieces for the replacement jaw, so that when we put them back together, everything fits quite nicely. And we also have to come up with a guide or a splint, really, that'll hold all these pieces to get used to hold the bone together until it be, again, made by hand in the operating room. But what we're planning on doing is using the 3D printing to use our metal printer to print these so they can be precisely printed prior to the surgery. It makes everything go a lot quicker and easier. Also, when we look at our 3D printing, part of our work is helping orthopedic surgeons design new types of orthopedic implants. So this is a stemless humeral implant and also a fracture stem implant. These were designed, 3D printed, and tested in cadavers. And then after that, we printed 3D printed metal versions so we could do some full strength testing. So here's a picture of the commercial one, and we have a gap here that we aren't able to address. And this was the problem that the orthopedic surgeon came to us. He said he wanted something like this designed that gave him additional control over the orientation. And so that was our challenge. And so this was our resulting device. We simply added in basically another degree of freedom in the adjusting mechanism to allow them to have a little bit more control over it. And of course, it lines much better, meaning we generally get better outcomes as well. So a lot of those are things that we are doing today, and we are really laser focused on the immediate needs of our healthcare system, but it's become increasingly clear that being able to provide lower cost care for patients at home is the direction we need to be heading. And in the wake of COVID-19, there's going to be even more reasons to follow this path. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what it means when we talk about the home hospital or hospital of the future and how we monitor our health using home and wearable devices. And then really also, how do we make healthcare accessible to the billions of marginalized people in the world? And I think that that relies on certainly technology and science, but I think you also have to apply it with a bit of humanity and compassion as well. So in a talk at Mayo last February, noted futurist Christian Crom talked about a massive disruption that's coming over the next decade. And he called this the technology tsunami. There's no avoiding it, and companies that aren't ready for it are going to get crushed. What we're looking at in healthcare is being able to make good use of longitudinal patient data sets. So that is data across time. That's going to allow us to integrate medical data, financial data, data from home and self-monitoring devices. And we should be able to do this then over the patient's entire life. And that's how we create these longitudinal data sets. We also know that advanced analytics and AI engines are going to help us find really some unexpected things out of this data and information that is usable for patients and their caregivers. And we really know that quality improvement measures require measures and metrics, but sometimes the data in a healthcare system can be hard to access. But I think that that's going to change. You know, we now have the ability to look at data in a lot of different ways to figure out what is really happening. There's also going to be this continuum of care model where patients start at a major healthcare center like a Mayo Clinic or a Stanford when they have really serious, complex conditions, and then they will transfer into their community care facilities and eventually to receiving care at home. I think this continuum of care is going to become much more common. And we're going to see real-time refinement of individualized care solutions. So we're going to have data from home monitoring. We can make changes on the fly. And really, it's the explosion in consumer wearable devices that is going to be morphing into wearable medical devices over the next decade. And then there's going to be this seamless integration of monitoring and care from clinical caregivers, social and community structures, and family members as well. And I really think our interconnected world is going to make this inevitable. And as engineers, it's nice to know that our future is going to be full of technology. We always need management and leadership skills and things like that. But I think everybody in healthcare really needs to find a few engineer friends, because futurists are great. You know, they can give you all the hype. We all know that robots are going to change how our society functions. But, you know, they already have, but there aren't likely to really be any Terminator Model T800s helping us out. So engineers can help explain why the Da Vinci robot is going to work and the Terminator T800 isn't. Robotic surgery as it exists today is primarily an assistive technology for the surgeon. But in the future, these systems are going to become a lot more autonomous. We're likely to see a surgeon in a healthcare epicenter like Mayo monitoring and directing surgical robots from all over the world. In fact, one of our neurosurgeons is really excited about the idea of doing robotic surgery on the mission to Mars. So, you know, we gotta think big. And have you ever tried watching an action movie with an engineer? I'm going to save you some trouble. Something is always wrong. The technology doesn't work, the physics doesn't work, and we're going to tell you about it endlessly like it's a personal affront. And the nice thing about engineers is we can tell you what technology has substance and which is hype. And I think it's this ability to discern potential from hype that's going to be really important, because we need to be investing in technology, but it's got to be the right technology. And really, maybe there is a Terminator T800 in our future. Boston Dynamics is one of the world leaders in mobile robots. They create all sorts of design based on humans and animals, and they're trained to perform a whole host of difficult actions. So it's pretty amazing what these robots are able to do at this point. So perhaps not quite Arnold in the Terminator, but we're definitely getting there. So when I think about the drivers of healthcare, it can help to look back a little bit. So at the end of the 19th century, as I mentioned in the early part of my talk, we were seeing the effects of aseptic surgery and anesthesia. By the middle of the 20th century, antibiotics were starting to make a huge impact on health and longevity. And now as we move into the 21st century, these changes are going to be driven both by technology and changing demographics as well. So one of the biggest drivers of change in healthcare is our aging population. By 2050, the world's going to be home to 10 billion people, and 2 billion of these are going to be age 60 or older, and almost 500 million are going to be over 80 years of age. And this is being seen most dramatically right now in Japan. They are aging first, but the US and Europe really aren't far behind. So this is the age chart from Japan from 1965 to 2065. And you can see that the pyramid, age versus population, essentially inverts. And this graph also shows that this is going on all over the world. This is not a localized occurrence. So we know that this is going to change our social structures, and it's also going to have huge implications on healthcare. And if that wasn't enough, we're seeing a huge shortage in the number of healthcare providers. So the physician shortage is expected to reach 85,000 in the United States by 2032 because of the complexity of training, our aging population, and the resulting retirements from that. So we've really got to rethink how we train physicians and caregivers and how we provide care, because this simply isn't sustainable if we don't have enough physicians to match the way we practice today. And when we look at technology advances kind of on a geological timescale, the era we live in today is just unprecedented. And that's why I'm so excited about the next decade. I mean, look at the history of innovation. It took millions of years to go from early tools to fire, and almost another million years to develop from hunter-gatherers to an agricultural-based society. But these changes now keep coming faster and faster. And I just can't imagine what we're going to see over the next decade. I still find it hard to believe that the iPhone is only about 12 years old. So you think about how much that invention has changed society and the way that we interact with each other. And you really wonder what 2030 is going to look like. And as a longtime science fiction fan, I do keep asking, when are we going to finally see robots? And I do think that this decade is finally the time. The advances in the computational power are making this a real possibility. And you add to that an established need due to our aging society, and it's kind of the perfect storm of factors. So Japan is really aggressively pursuing robot assistance, for example. They're investing heavily in these robotic care providers. And I do want to mention, though, that robots aren't going to be able to replace people. If you think about healthcare, nurses are the unsung heroes of healthcare. My mom was a nurse, my sister's a nurse, my niece is a nurse. Even the nuns that started Mayo Clinic became nurses, and you can't replace their compassion and empathy with a computer, but you can sure use robots to help them. Here on the right is another type of robot. This one can be controlled from hundreds of miles away, and it provides information on force and humidity and temperature. This is the kind of information that a doctor would want to get when directly examining a patient. Some of our colleagues in Jacksonville are already actively investigating the use of haptics. These are most remote force sensors attached to robot arms to do remote exams. In pharmacy robots, they're going to reduce errors and allow pharmacists to spend a lot less time filling prescriptions and a lot more time with patients. And you add to that the clinical decision-making systems that will help identify drug interactions, and we can be sure that we're not going to prescribe medications that interfere with each other. And we can also create novel surgical tools right at the point of care. And we can make simulation systems. So something like this can be used for training and practice prior to surgery. So this device is a model of the descending aorta. This is created from CT images. Well, this would be created from MR images of aortic aneurysms. And it's used to practice the deployment of stents to repair the aneurysms. So this is used in a surgical suite. So you can practice surgery as realistically as possible. So there's a pump on the right-hand side of do this in surgery under fluoroscopy. So the physicians can be practicing a surgery. And so they do surgery on this model just as if it was a patient. And this is incredibly valuable as a training aid for new surgeons, and also for experienced surgeons to try a new procedure or deal with some complex anatomy that they haven't had to deal with before. So it's been incredibly useful for us. And our engineering team is planning our next adventure in 3D printing with a titanium printer. So we're hoping to be able to print custom implants for animal trials and human clinical trials in a couple of years. We're also working with the FDA to address some of the regulatory challenges. And we're really poised to be in the forefront of moving personal medicine into these customized implants. The global 3D printing market is going to be generating over $2 billion in revenue by the end of 2024. And these 3D printers can be used to create inexpensive medical devices like a spine cage or a cranial implant. We also use them to create these patient-specific implants utilizing CT or MRI scans for complex surgical repairs. And really, point-of-care 3D printing has been growing as a training vehicle for 3D visualization for physicians, as well as for manufacturing both implantable and non-implantable medical devices like surgical models and cutting guides and instruments. And currently, the 3D printing of patient-specific implants is really time-consuming. It can take weeks or months to develop, and the resulting models are really, really expensive. But putting that additive manufacturing right at the point of care is going to save time and money, and it's going to drive innovation because you're going to have the technologists, the engineers, the clinicians all working together in this collaborative environment to design the implant that that particular patient really, really needs. There's some work going on in neuroprostheses too that I'm really interested in. So there's a new study led by neuroscientists from the University of Chicago that are bringing us closer to building prosthetic limbs for humans that can recreate that sense of touch through a direct interface with the brain. And we've all heard about the Elon Musk company Neuralink probably, which aims to put computers inside the human brain. And he is not the only one working in this space. It's an active area of research around the country. One of the cool new applications of neuroprostheses and 3D printing is the creation of prosthetic arms. So I'm going to show you a quick video from a company called Open Bionics. Their arm's called the Hero Arm, and their mission is to turn, well, I'll let this play. So I love this one. This arm is called the Hero Arm, and their mission is to turn children with limb differences into bionic heroes. And what's amazing to me is the price of that custom arm that you saw in the video is about $700. So really, really quite expensively. And it's the amazing power of 3D printing that's allowing us to do that. So we've got this Internet of Things too at our disposal. This is a giant network of connected things and people that allow sharing of data within the network. And the idea behind using these technologies in healthcare is to extract usable information from all of the data that we've got. So data analytics in its simplest form is just analyzing data to find trends and answer questions. So if we think about all the data in a typical electronic medical record, we have now the power, we can use data analytics to help us present the important information to the care provider, because there's simply too much information for a person to be able to manage. We can also use wearables to track health status and predict future diseases. And I think one of the huge applications leverages the strengths of AI and traditional pattern recognition systems to analyze CT and MR images. And this has become a huge decision support system for neuroradiologists. Some of the drivers of big data and analytics include the rapidly decreasing price of storage. So do you know how much it costs to have unlimited data storage? Unlimited data storage, now that's a lot of data. So Microsoft OneDrive now offers unlimited data storage to every single one of us for $9 a month. So you can store every movie, every book, every photo, every document you ever access in your entire life for $9 a month. And that would have been simply unimaginable a few years ago. And businesses like Mayo Clinic have a lot more data than individuals do. There was a recent article published by Mayo that said Mayo Clinic seeks to dominate with data. Healthcare data is increasing at about 50% per year. We now have over 2 zettabytes of data. And a zettabyte is a lot of data. A zettabyte is equivalent to a stack of books from the Earth to Pluto 20 times over. So it's a lot of data. And clinical trials are going to change. Currently, drugs are tested by the companies that manufacture them. Not surprisingly, these tend to favor the manufacturer. Often with sponsored trials, sites performing the clinical trials are contractually prevented from disclosing the results of the clinical trial without company approval. And with more and more data being stored online, real-time clinical trials can start to become a possibility because we have all of a patient's symptoms, their comorbidities, their treatments, their outcomes, all available in these online systems. And we can start to compare the effectiveness of drugs and therapies based on real-world use in patients to these carefully controlled and sometimes over-controlled clinical trials. And this is already happening. There's a project now in the UK called Open Trials, which is trying to do this, to gather all of the data from the clinical trials that are going on there. And we now have a supercomputer in our pocket. If the iPad 2 had been released in 1988, it would have been the most powerful computer in the world. The Cray 2 was developed by a company founded in Minneapolis. It was the fastest computer in the world from 1985 to 1990. And today, its computational power is equivalent to the iPhone that we all carry around with us. And by 2030, most of the world is going to be connected. Over 90% of the people will have a digital presence by 2030. And this has significant impact on our society and how we can provide healthcare to the entire world. When we think about designing the hospital of the future, sometimes it helps to think about another industry. One of the ways I like to look at it is with the move to driverless cars. So if you look at big cities right now, traffic is currently a mess. People speed up, slow down at the exact wrong time, and they create these waves of disruption in the traffic. But if you put a GPS and drive-by-wire controls in each car, you can maintain perfect spacing and speed up traffic dramatically. You might not even need traffic lights anymore. And healthcare is much the same. People are always really going to be involved in providing oversight and review. AI systems are going to help. They're going to help make the physicians and care providers' jobs easier, but it's still with the people that are going to be providing the care. But I think the hospital of the future is going to be in our home and in our community. It's going to travel with us wherever you go, and only really serious conditions are going to require a stay in a hospital. For most, the hospital is going to be in your home or perhaps in your community hospital. And this all points to a need for the major healthcare systems to rethink their plans. Expansion no longer means more hospital beds or more brick and mortar facilities. It means providing care wherever the patient is. And that's a very technology-centric type of approach. We do hear a lot about blockchain. I think blockchain's got some potential here as well. Blockchain is simply a distributed, decentralized data ledger. I like to think of it as a shared database. It's kind of a simple way to think about it. It allows us to create digital records, allows them to be shared and managed securely on a network. And it's best known probably for its use in cryptocurrencies, primarily Bitcoin, but applying the technology to healthcare is compelling for several reasons. This gives us the ability to create these unique digital identities where all of your data can be safely stored and you can access it anywhere in the world. And it supports this exchange of data while also providing security, integrity, and control of the data by the owner. And that's what we all want with our healthcare data. We want to be able to access it wherever in the world we are when we need it, and we want to be able to do so safely and securely. And I think this use of big data in healthcare has the potential to improve decision-making and really address some of the inefficiencies. So we can now provide continuity over an entire lifetime of care. A patient's born, we create a record, we provide care, we track results, we can follow progress until the eventual death of the patient. So this gives us a lot of information on a single patient, but now we can start to put this data together on multiple patients and pull information from there so that we can determine the best course of care for future patients using these historical records that we have. And healthcare is facing some significant changes, even without the digital transformation that's going on. Costs are rising at an unsustainable rate. Digitization is creating some fundamental challenges to our conception of privacy and ownership of data. And the evolution of science and medicine are driving prices up and making it even more expensive to provide care. So those are the things we've got to deal with. And there's just so much data, and we keep saying, gosh, wouldn't it be helpful if I could actually use this data in a clinical setting? But in many cases, it's just too much data. So we've got to start managing that data better. And healthcare is a little bit behind when it comes to big data compared to other industries. And people ask, why is healthcare taking so long to take advantage of some of the power of big data and data analytics and the power of the interconnected world? And I think a lot of that is because healthcare data is so doggone complex. But another reason is it's a highly regulated industry, and highly regulated industries struggle to take advantage of advances in technology. Patient privacy is closely managed, and that prevents us from accessing the data to take a look at broad trends in treatment, diagnosis, or outcomes. Healthcare also tends to be pretty conservative because we have this do no harm culture. So we're relatively conservative. And it's also highly fragmented. We've got a large number of actors, and some of these actors are very strong, very invested players. And that includes, major healthcare systems like Mayo Clinic or Kaiser. It includes companies like Epic that dominate the EMRs, and of course, all of the big insurance companies as well. So in the future, I think there's going to be two fundamental shifts reshaping the healthcare industry. First, healthcare is going to be delivered as a seamless continuum of care. We're going to move away from the clinic-centered point of care model, and we're going to have a much more of a focus on prevention and early intervention. Second, health and healthcare delivery are going to focus on the person as an individual, and we often call this the consumerization of healthcare. We're also going to need to adapt because payment models are now switching from volume, that is, you're paid per procedure, to payment for value. So you're paid based on getting good outcomes, essentially. And we've talked about how much more data we have, but we haven't figured out yet who owns the data. Do you own your data? Does your healthcare provider own it? Does the insurance company own it? Does the government own it? We simply haven't answered that question. And to really make use of the power of data, we've got to be able to establish ownership. So one of our founding fathers, Dr. Charlie Mayo, said, if we excel at anything, it's in our capacity for translating idealism into action. The focus of the group that I work with is applied engineering. It's creating devices that can be used to advance our practice. And I'm really excited to see where this takes us over the next decade. All right, and at that point, I think we've got 5 or 6 minutes left. So if anybody does want to ask any questions, I'd certainly be happy to entertain them at this point. Well, that's good. I probably told you everything you need to know about healthcare and technology. Looks like, let's see.
What's one advancement you're really excited to see in healthcare?
Well, there's a lot of them, but I think probably the one that Mayo Clinic is the most interested in is this concept of the home hospital. We're doing a lot of work in the platform area. We're trying to figure out how do we more effectively treat patients at home instead of having them come into the hospital? How do we treat patients a little bit less expensively? There's a hospital system in St. Louis called Mercy Virtual Hospital. They are a virtual hospital. They don't have any beds. All of their patients stay at home, and it's a really intriguing model. I think if we look at, you know, the baby boomers, as the baby boomers are getting older and getting ready to retire, most of them would like to stay in their homes as long as possible. And technology has the ability to allow us to help them do that through assistive devices, through monitoring devices. The other thing that we really start to get as we get less expensive wearables is the ability to monitor people before they get sick. So the whole idea of preventive care, you know, it's much better to prevent somebody from getting sick than it is to treat them once they are sick. And the power of wearable devices allows us to do a lot more kind of regular routine monitorings of people's health, so that we can catch them when they're pre-diabetic, when we really can make some changes based on diet that'll prevent them from having to go on lifelong insulin and things like that.
Very nice. All right. I think this pretty much wraps it up. And stop.